This is the first interview of any kind that Ryan Condell has given since it was announced that he would be the new showrunner on the first Game of Thrones prequel TV series, House of the Dragon. Now, the full interview is 40 minutes long, and it was done by another channel beyond the trailer. Please follow the link below to check that out. Not just because I feel bad about taking the clips and I want to share the love back by sending viewers back there, but because I watched the whole thing and it was genuinely a very interesting 40-minute interview. That it was about, he's talking about that he's setting up a new podcast, which he's co-hosting, talking about a big hobby he has, collecting movie memorabilia. Props and costumes that were actually used on camera, like, for example, during the Zoom meeting, he holds up, this is an original used Stormtrooper helmet from A New Hope. And he talks about how he had one from Return of the Jedi, then he had to switch it for the A New Hope one. And he collects various Star Wars things, and also Indiana Jones. He was talking about how he collected the hat, and in this jacket here, and how it's hard to get what you call a screen match, where it's actually a really detailed, hardcore collector's thing. If you have to figure out, okay, this scratch here lines up with the scratch visible in this high-resolution image. Yeah, this really looks like it was something used on camera in this Indiana Jones thing, or Star Wars, or Alien and Blade Runner he also talks about. So, mostly Star Wars, though. He has this really impressive, he's a professional level collector of this movie memorabilia stuff. And he's not just talking about collecting the memorabilia, but also the history of cinema, because he's talking about these classic Spielberg movies. He's also talking about collecting memorabilia from The Maltese Falcon and other stuff like that. And saying how these movies are classics for a reason, that they transcend time period to become part of the pop culture landscape, in turn affecting George Lucas and everyone else in the 70s, and now, that these things you can trace back to movies in the 30s, and how it transcends time and helps shape the art form. And this is part of our real history, and it's important, the history of cinema like that. Wonderful interview. I want to direct you all to it. It's 40 minutes long over on the other channel. Please check them out so they get the clicks. But I said, it's 5 minutes out of a full 40 where he's actually talking about House of the Dragon. I want to get everyone's attention by making a short clip of it. Now, not just reposting it, but adding my own analysis to this, because I'm citing the other stuff. My analysis is we learned 2 new points of substance from this interview. Point 1, they have already hired a lead costumer and a production designer, and they've been doing extensive concept artwork so far. They've already got concepts he's looking at and going through. The weird rumor I heard, though, which I wanted to share with all of you here, is when Westeros.org reported on this, they broke the news on this. They were one of the first, of the mainstream news sites reporting on Game of Thrones stuff. They were actually the ones covering this. Westeros.org mentioned in their report, because we're close to Martin, we have heard rumors that Deborah Riley is going to come back as the production designer on the prequel. Which is shocking. Because if you're new to my channel, check out the clips from the Last Watch documentary that I keep posted up on the front page of my channel. If you've seen the Last Watch documentary, she was really laying into and criticizing Benioff and Weiss, as was Miguel Sapochnik, who's now a co-showrunner on this, saying their production, you can see the 5 minutes in, she's enthusiastic, and as they skip to months later, because it took over a year to film, she is just fuming at them. She says, the schedule is impossible. When we tell them things are physically impossible, they don't listen. There are a lot of frayed nerves, myself among them, that she is really bitter, and that they abused her trust on that. As they did with Sapochnik, also says things like, it's David and Dan's fault. We shouldn't be filming a night like this. It doesn't make sense. So, that's weird, because I had heard rumors that fans who encountered her at a convention in Britain a year ago, she was upset and just not willing to talk about it. Just when they asked, will you be on the prequel, she just sort of said, not really, and deflected from it. And that's all just rumor. But then again, that was for the Long Night prequel, so maybe things changed behind the scenes. Maybe she originally wasn't going to come back, but changed her mind because Miguel Sapochnik is credited as a co-showrunner. Well, they're doing what Game of Thrones should have done, where the showrunner is Condell, but technically credited as a co-executive producer is someone who actually understands the physical production side of things and logistics, this longtime veteran director, respected Miguel Sapochnik. So maybe Riley would come back if Sapochnik was in charge like this and had veto power, veto power to say, no, it makes no sense to... They made her build a fully realized King's Landing street set. 17 alleyways. It took 7 months to build, and then by their own admission, they barely used it for that Arya chase scene when the city is burning. And all the other things they built, which, if you listen to the Blu-ray commentary, they are openly mocking her to her face in the Blu-ray commentary for episode 1, that, haha, this is another one on our list of needless work that we made Deborah do to making another fully realized set that barely appears. And they were working their production team ragged, and they just didn't care. They were removed from it. They weren't even there. They'd gone home. And they said, we don't need to go to the night shoots. So I would really look forward to having Deborah Riley back, just to show this was more her TV show than it was David and Dan's by the end. That her and all the directors and production team that worked so hard on it, they deserve to do it the right way, on their terms. If you don't know Deborah Riley, she's worked on a lot of things. She joined the show in season 4. She's from Australia, and she actually worked on the first Matrix movie. So we don't know if these rumors that Deborah Riley might be coming back have any truth to them. Let's keep an eye on that. I am pretty sure, though, that Michelle Clapton probably won't be coming back as lead costume designer, simply because she said in multiple interviews how she has spent all of her creative energy that she could in this universe. Not for her career, I mean, she wants to do other movies and stuff, just for this world, she didn't think she could take it any farther. That she thought out a unique visual style for the societies of each of the 7 kingdoms, and all the lands beyond, from the Free Cities to the Dothraki. That she didn't know how much more she could add, and I see that. And I would like to see her come back for a cameo costume or two, but really, for a different time period, it makes sense to have a different person designing the costumes, which leads into news point 2. That point 1 was they have actually hired a costumer and a production designer already. Point 2 is Condell made it clear they are not using this as an opportunity for a soft reboot of the visual style. No, that he said, we are trying to keep the sets, props, and costumes, broadly speaking, in the same visual universe as what you saw in Game of Thrones. Think of long-standing media franchises, like superhero things that get rebooted, like everything from Batman to, I'm thinking a big example is the X-Men movies. It wasn't an outright continuity reboot, but when they started doing prequels, they had an entirely different visual look. And that maybe they'd want to take it in a different direction because different people are in charge. That if you've seen the official commissioned artwork for the Song of Ice and Fire novels, just in terms of the costuming for Cersei, it's very different from what they ultimately went with in the TV show. And Westeros Dog really hates that. Why didn't you do exactly what the books had done? I really like how much thought went into the TV show, even if it's a little different. Clapton always justified everything she did of, well, this is what the Iron Islands would look like based on their local resources. This is what the Reach would look like. Thought went into this, just because she reached a different conclusion. And I like seeing the artwork of Book Cersei, and this is what I mentally picture her looking like. But at the same time, it's, for lack of a better term, it looks too structured to be something that you wear in a TV show. I wouldn't say modern Elizabethan. It doesn't quite fit the low fantasy grunginess and lack of, because there's some really ornate fantasy stuff in A Song of Ice and Fire, even though it's famous for trying to be really realistic. That just in terms of visual stuff, I don't want Cersei's costumes to be too ostentatious, too over the top. You want it to be grounded. And I can see that, in some real-life fashions were really over the top in terms of what the aristocracy was wearing, dresses and stuff. But I like both. And there was some question of, would they try to make it more like the book artwork? Or would they go in some really radically different direction, not like the books, but not like the first TV show either? No, Condell has made it very clear, plain right here, it's going to be part of the same visual universe. And me personally, I'm thinking of Slaver's Bay, when it was introduced in Season 3, was a different part of the world, but tonally still felt like Game of Thrones. That used world, low fantasy, worn leather, worn and aged, that it didn't look like this sci-fi fantasy setting, that it looked really grounded. And it's hard for me to verbalize that. It looked similar enough, obviously, because Clapton made both, that this is, instead of in space, it's in time, that it's 200 years before Game of Thrones. But again, as he very intelligently pointed out, they didn't invent new technologies between the dance and Game of Thrones. 200 years passed. It's not like they suddenly have plastic and rubber or machine pressing for clothing or anything. Pretty much the same technology level for costuming, at least. The only real difference is just personal preference in terms of fashion styles. As he pointed out, that think about it. We can just look at a photo of someone and go, their clothing style is from the 1990s, or the 1980s, or from the 1970s. That for us, we have recognizable fashion shifts on the decade scale. So logically, 200 years ago for them, even though it's a medieval world, it should look a little different. I mean, compare the year 1200 with the year 1400. That if Game of Thrones is supposed to be a loose analog of the War of the Roses, how much did costuming shift even in England between the War of the Roses and the Plantagenets under Richard I and King John and that era of, I keep thinking of them in terms of Shakespeare plays instead of what actually happened, but it didn't change that much. He said it's a medieval world, but fashion still would change to an extent just because of what people like. And that was a big point that Clapton had in the show, which I loved. She called it the trickle-down principle. That this isn't Instagram or Twitter where people can show their allegiance with a hashtag. People wore their allegiance. They displayed it by dressing like the faction leaders they were trying to emulate, and they announced it to the world through their manner of dress. So everyone in each of the 7 kingdoms dresses like the lead family because they're trying to curry favor with them, that the Stark followers, their vassals, dress like the Starks do, but cheaper. The Lannisters' vassals dress in cheaper versions of what they're wearing. And I love that whole thing she worked out, that across seasons 3 and 4, after Marjorie Tyrell comes to King's Landing, she planned out this gradual shift, slow but consistent, in the background characters and noblewomen at the royal court. Gradually they shift from dressing like Cersei style to dressing like Marjorie, to show that she's losing favor. Or think of how season 1, Sansa tried to dress like Cersei for a while, but by season 3 she was trying to dress like Marjorie. People emulate others. So in terms of the Dance of the Dragons, the factions themselves are named after fashion choices. They're called the Blacks and the Greens, simply because they explain, well, it was a nickname that stuck, that there was this big tournament where Rhaenyra showed up wearing a Targaryen black dress, and her stepmother Alicent wore a green dress, this stunning green dress, and before long, their followers at the royal court, each of the 2 rival parties, all of Rhaenyra's followers started wearing black, and all of Alicent's started wearing green, and it just mentions in passing they would wear the same style. Now, obviously, this is a book. He can't describe the visuals of this, just the color, what it was like. But think about it in terms of the cut of the men's jackets or the style of the women's dresses will be consistent among the Greens, different from the Blacks. That the Greens are the Lannisters, the Hightowers, and Rhaenyra's followers are the Starks, or like Jane Arryn. You'll see this consistent, that the 2 political factions have 2 distinctive styles, so you can easily recognize it. I wonder how they're going to do that. Because before we had 7 kingdoms and really 9 regions. Now it's, well, the Lannisters are on Team Hightower, that there's 2 big sides with some variation between the families within it. So I'm really looking forward to that the books mentioned they showed their rivalry through their manner of fashion and costuming in this. So ultimately, I think that was the right choice to go, look, this should visually look like it was part of the universe of Game of Thrones, but there will be entirely new fashions in it because it's in a different time period. I mean, they didn't use flashbacks enough in Game of Thrones because the showrunner said they didn't like them because they're bad at them. But remember that one great flashback we had at the beginning of Season 5, where they flash back to young Cersei, and that's when her new style was just starting out, and you realize she's kind of imitating the Targaryen style of asymmetric cuts. And you see her friend, who's another noblewoman, young noblewoman, and she's dressed in this style we've never seen before, because it's like the old style that got displaced from court. That they mentioned that before the Targaryens were kicked out, people were trying to dress like them. But after their decline in exile, like Viserys is the only person who really dresses in the old Targaryen style, with this asymmetric cut and peaked shoulders. So the one time we got a flashback, we saw 30 years ago, people didn't dress in exactly the same fashions. It changes slightly over time. And in this case of the Dance of the Dragons, they were self-consciously displaying their faction allegiance. Maybe Rhaenyra, well, we know Rhaenyra wears her hair in a braid, and Alicent does not. Does that mean that Jane Arryn will also want to wear a braid to emulate that? Well, a couple of things they could do in terms of the costuming. Do Rhaenyra's dresses lace up the front while Alicent's lace up the back? To just show who is on whose side. We shall see of just how do you differentiate this visually, but these are questions they are already asking. They already have a costumer working on it. So, while we didn't hear much on this, this is real detail we're starting to get on House of the Dragon.